Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about progressive overload. One of the most discussed topics here in the training world. I guess it's something I need to discuss regularly because I make a lot of videos, a lot of informative videos, and I think we need to always make it clear and come back to the basics on this stuff regarding progressive overload. Now, my stance over the years has changed on progressive overload based upon the weight of the evidence that I've seen out there regarding if progressive overload causes muscle hypertrophy or if it's evidence of muscle hypertrophy, right? Now, that's a controversial topic, and me being a strength-based guy, I'm always going to be biased towards tension. Yeah, if you get stronger, that's what stimulates growth, more weight on the bar, right? Progression causes muscle growth. But you know what? I think the evidence is skewed in the other direction of my bias. I think the evidence shows that more likely the training volume, effective training volume, is actually the stimulator of growth and adaptation, and that progressive overload, is actually a side effect of it, right? That it's evidence of it because it's a side effect. And that's an unpopular statement in a lot of circles. A lot of people get angry at me for having changed my stance on that. And I'll just have to accept that. But you know what? We have to evolve as people, and we have to evolve based on the information. I just think that's the more likely scenario based upon the weight of the evidence. Now, that being said, that means we should still be pursuing progressive overload. Why? Because if you don't see progressive overload happening, you probably haven't gained any muscle mass, right? If you don't see progressive overload, you haven't gained muscle mass. But I think the other thing that gets confusing to a lot of people is that the more advanced we get, the harder it is to see progression. Okay? And that's because gaining muscle becomes a much slower process. I mean, a lot of my clients get upset with that. They're always like, oh, I want to push more and more and more weight on the bar. And it's like, well, until you stall, then you're going to feel bad. Then you're going to want me to fix it. Okay? There are other metrics as we get more advanced that we have to use for these things than just weight on the bar. But let's talk about how we judge progressive overload, or how I judge it as a coach for my own lifters. The most obvious is mechanical tension. Okay? We would define mechanical tension as more weight on the bar. If you can lift 200 pounds for 1 rep or 200 pounds for 10 reps, and you can go up to 205 for 1 now, or 205 for 10, and you put 5 more pounds on the bar, in theory, that's progressive overload. Why? Because it represents tension. But does it always mean more tension? No. When does it mean more tension? When the range of motion and the technique is the same. In other words, you see me doing bench press there. I'm touching my chest on every rep on these close grip presses with my buffalo bar, right? Touching my chest on every rep, locking it on every rep. Same range of motion. I'm not cheating or using anything to bounce or swing the weight up or to use external momentum. Therefore, if I put 5 more pounds on this bar, that would represent increased tension. Okay, if you simply move more weight, but you don't use the form, you cut range of motion in some way. Cut your squats a little short. Maybe you don't lock out the bottom of a row. You keep a little bit of bend in the arm, right? Start trimming the range of motion down. Or you cheat. People are notorious for doing that on a lot of standing exercises. And they think they're being strict till they video themselves. Well, if you can't control the amount of cheating you're doing, you don't know if you got progressive overload. Doesn't mean you didn't stimulate growth, no. It just means you don't have any way to track it. So it would be increased tension in the form of more weight being a representative of more tension on the muscle, at least at the point of peak tension, just like on the bench press at the bottom. Right? That's when the pecs have the most mechanical tension placed upon them. Okay, more weight. That's progressive overload, right? More overload on the muscles. How about more basic training volume in the form of more repetitions? Okay. If you can lift 200 pounds for 8 reps, and in a few weeks you can lift it for 9 reps, and a couple weeks later you can lift it for 10 reps, that is progressive overload. It's progressive overload in the form of reps, right? In the form of reps. Now, a lot of people would say, well, more volume. Well, that's more reps. Reps isn't quite the same as our volume. Okay, that's a form of progression. More volume would be, can we do more sets with it? Okay. When you have that 200 pounds and you can do one set of 10, but maybe you can't squeeze out a second set of 10, not there yet. But what happens when you can add another set? What happens when you've been doing 3 sets of 10 with that, and now you can do 4 sets of 10, and you can squeeze out that 4th set of 10 reps with that same weight? Well, that represents progressive overload. All right, that's our 3 big ones. It's our 3 big ones. We can get into another one in a minute, which I think very much matters. It very much matters on the stimulation side. Okay. What do we have? And they're in order of priority. Mechanical tension does represent the highest form of progressive overload. Don't let anybody convince you otherwise. That's nonsense. And I'm saying that as a person who thinks that the quality volume is a driver of growth. Tension is the big one. Okay, because that one is far less ambiguous and it's the hardest to achieve. It's actually very, very difficult for an advanced lifter to put 10 pounds on a lift. As a novice, you'll put 100 pounds on an exercise, sometimes in less than 6 months, right? Some cases, 150 pounds. Advanced lifters putting 10 pounds on a lift is a lot of work. That might take you a year and a half of your life. Okay, that's the big one. Reps is the next one. Next easiest to achieve. Adding a rep to an exercise is actually usually a little bit easier in terms of progression than putting 5 more pounds on a bar oftentimes, right? Unless we're dealing with very low reps. If we're dealing with higher reps, adding a rep. Then adding a set usually is the least form of progression because that's actually much easier to do. It's much easier to do in terms of progression. Now, we can manipulate all of these, can't we? Right? And a good training program for the non-novice lifter manipulates all 3 forms of this progression, don't they? Right? We manipulate weight on the bar, number of reps you're doing, number of sets you're doing. Perfectly normal. But what else do we have? A lot of people are going to say, what about work density? I don't know that work density always represents progressive overload. I think work density can more often than not represent in how shape you are, what's your conditioning like. Work density is how quickly can you do the sets without a rest. I think it's more of a product of conditioning than actual muscle hypertrophy, strength. Not saying it doesn't matter, it does, but more of a conditioning component in my experience working with lifters. So our other one, bar speed. And I'm doing speed work while we're talking about that. How about bar speed? Bar speed absolutely represents progression. If you can move the same weight faster, you have gained muscle and strength. Why? It represents greater force production. Just like moving a weight itself, adding more weight is a new resistance, it's a new overload. If you can accelerate the same weight noticeably faster, that is absolutely progression. Okay, and I don't care whether it's a 1 rep set, a 5 rep set, it represents progression. And I'll venture to say it represents a form of training volume that stimulates adaptation on top of it. Why? The data we have shows that if you move a weight fast enough, it produces a quality rep, even if it's a weight that's too light and you're not far enough into a set to reach upper threshold fibers. It'll cause upper threshold muscle fibers and motor units to be recruited in a part of a set with a weight and rep scheme that they wouldn't normally hit. So if you move a weight really explosively, you get more quality training volumes. Come back over to that point of volume, right? The number of quality reps you get. The quality reps are the ones that hit the upper threshold muscle fibers. Usually if you're doing 10 rep sets to failure, it's the last 5. But if you're moving a weight fast enough, such as what I'm doing with that speed work there, all 3 of those reps qualify. Okay? That's a weight that I could do more than 10 reps with. But in this instance, doing it just for the 3 represents 3 quality reps. Whereas, let's say that was my 15 rep max, I'd have to take it to at least rep 13 to get that normally. So bar speed represents both a stimulation of adaptation as well as progressive overload, doesn't it? And we can argue about what came first, the chicken or the egg on the other one, all that we want. It's largely irrelevant in this context of programming, though, because we're always going to be seeking to progress. And I would say we're always going to seek to progress on those four things. And they're going to be weight on the bar, how many reps you can do, how much volume you can do even with the same weight, and how fast can you move that weight. That represents the four cornerstones of progressive overload to me personally when I look at stuff with my own athletes and lifters. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.